afternoon. Welcome to the University of Melbourne's second online MedTech webinar for 2024. We're excited you're joining us today. My name is Professor Andrea O'Connor, and I'm the Shanahan Chair in Frontier Medical Solutions in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Melbourne, and I'm the Co-Director of the Victorian MedTech Skills and Devices Hub. It's my pleasure to be your MC for our webinar panel discussion today. We'll be discussing MedTech translation from research to manufacturing. I'd like to start today's event by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm hosting the webinar, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. This webinar series is presented by the MedTech platform in the Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology and the Graham Clark Institute at the University of Melbourne. If you'd like to learn more about our research and innovation programs or view any of the previous webinar recordings, please have a look at our website. Today's topic is MedTech translation from research to manufacturing. And during this webinar, we're going to explore how projects can improve their chances of translation into successful products, able to improve patients' lives, which is what we aim for in the long run. Please note the event is being recorded. The video of the webinar will be placed on the university's Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology webpage. I would like to welcome Zara, who's our graphic illustrator who will be scribing today's discussion. Thank you, Zara. Okay, so a bit about today's topic. MedTech is really one of the most influential and fast-paced industries in the world, and with innovative technologies like bioactive implants, AI and robotics shaping the future of medicine, opportunities to create new MedTech products to help patients and clinicians are many. So today we're going to have a panel discussion on the medical technologies that play an ever-increasing role in healthcare with potential to address numerous unmet clinical needs. The pathway from an idea to manufacturing at scale is complex. So how can researchers and product developers ensure that their product can be successfully manufactured, ideally locally, to meet clinical needs and satisfy regulatory approval requirements? Today's webinar will explore how projects can improve their chances of translation into successful products, able to be used to improve patients' lives. Our expert panel brings perspectives from university research, from industry and from CSIRO in developing and commercialising MedTech products, with insights on the challenges and success factors for translating research outcomes into valuable products. So before we proceed with the panel discussion, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you online, and you're welcome to interact by typing questions for our speakers in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Some of you have submitted questions via the registration link, which is great. But if we spark some extra questions in our conversation, I encourage you to engage with the panel through writing those new questions or clicking the like button on questions that you would like to have answered. And we'll get to as many as we can during the session. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our first panellist, who is Andrew Batty.
Hey, Andrea.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for coming. Andrew is a MedTech executive with over 25 years' experience in the healthcare sector, where he's developed, executed and managed business strategies and companies to commercialise innovative and emerging technologies. He's worked in sales, marketing, business development, clinical operations and management with pharmaceutical and biotech companies, and he's launched private and ASX-listed companies, including Cogstate, Biomedical and Anatomics, a fascinating career path that he's had. He's established exits, manufacturing agreements and global distribution channels. Andrew is currently the director and founder of Lincoln Consulting Group, or Wonderland Medical, assisting businesses at startup, SME or corporate level to design, plan and implement commercial strategies. He was a partner at Templar Capital Group, raising local and foreign investment for Australian companies, and he's also currently the CEO of the ACMD, the Aikenhead Centre for Medical Discovery. Great to have you, Andrew. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for the intro.
No worries. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is David Collins. David is an associate professor in biomedical engineering at the University of Melbourne. Thanks for joining us, David. His research interests are in developing systems for advanced bioprinting using novel micromanipulation methods that span the length scales from single cell environments through to macro scale structures. David has expertise in integrated actuation methods in microfluidic systems with applications for patterning and sorting of microspecimens. He's engaged in collaborations across 4 continents, and he has ongoing research projects, including developing 3D bioprinting, high-throughput microscale separations, and disease-on-a-chip models. Thanks for coming, David.
Cheers.
And finally, I'd like to introduce our third panellist, who is Dr. Tim Hughes.
Hi, Andrea. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Tim is a Senior Principal Research Scientist and Team Leader for Biomedical Polymers at CSIRO. His work focuses on the design and synthesis of polymeric materials designed for specific biomedical applications. In particular, Tim's expertise is in the field of polymeric biomaterials, 3D printing, medical devices, nanomaterial hybrids, and various self-assembly systems. He has successfully led a series of commercially focused industrial projects, as well as a number of student projects covering a wide range of areas, including ocular devices, surgical tissue adhesives, drug delivery systems, cell therapies, cell encapsulation devices, medical image contrast agents, and polymer 3D printing to deliver scientific impacts and commercial outcomes. Quite a wide range of activities there. His team works closely with companies within the biomedical industry to solve real-world problems. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's begin our panel discussion. I'd like to bring everyone on screen and kick off with some introductory questions. So, Andrew, can I ask you, first of all, in your experience working with clinicians and researchers, what do you think are the most important factors that enable translation of a MedTech product idea into a commercial product?
Thanks, Andrea. It's the critical question. It's the $1 million question. I can say from our side, whenever we're looking to invest either time or resources or funding into a project, the number one thing we look at is the market. And number 2 is the IP position, and number 3 is the internal features or attributes of that entity. So the product performance and the people. But going back to the first one, really, the market is so critical. Who's going to buy this widget or this device, and how much can we sell it for, and how many can we actually sell? So really understanding who's going to buy it, and is there a market for us for it? Is it a nice to have product or a need to have product? What is the actual market size? What's the competitive landscape? Other companies, other products in that space? The regulatory barriers, ask yourself, why hasn't someone done it before? So they're the real features of, in that market assessment of trying to get, because clinicians come up with crazy ideas all the time, right? And it's us as the commercialization and translation folk who have to then take that concept and that idea and work with the researchers to translate that technology and then finally get it manufactured. So really understanding that clinical need. From an keep going. How much time have we got?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. From an IP position, also knowing that, is there a patent in place for this? And what is the patent actually kind of protecting? What's it stopping other people from doing? Maybe you don't need a patent. Maybe you've got cloud-based analytics and it's better to actually not patent and disclose your IP and maybe keep it in the cloud. And remember that a patent application is very different to a granted patent. So patent application hasn't yet been approved. So finally, then you get to the third most critical factor, and that is, translating a product is now let's start looking at the product. How do we manufacture it? How's it going to perform? How is it presented? Really ask yourself, how's it going to sit on the shelf? And all of your manufacturing and your translation and commercialization concepts in that space will impact how that device is going to sit on the shelf in the hospital. Say, if it's a cellular-based product, is it going to be lyophilized or frozen or sit in a fridge, or can it sit at room temperature? How's the device going to be manufactured locally, offshore, etc. So they're the 3 factors we generally would look at.
Fantastic. Yeah, a lot of practicalities, and it ends up being expensive. So the commercial aspect is something that we need to worry about for sure. David, can I ask you a question? You've got a number of projects going through the translation pathway, which is really exciting coming out of your research. Can you give us an example of one of your projects and tell us what your greatest challenges are in that process?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a bit of a challenge for me because as a researcher, I'm so interested in a lot of different things. But I guess I have 3 different projects at the moment that are kind of ongoing, and taking up a bit of time, and thinking about moving towards that commercial translation. The first is a reusable face mask that we've designed for clinical use. So we've actually started a company for this. I've got kind of a prototype or a mock-up for this right here. We've also developed a novel bleeding device that's going to be especially useful for older patients. That's actually undergoing clinical trials right now, literally at the University of Melbourne. And this is work that we're really excited about. We've also developed the world's fastest 3D bioprinting system for high throughput screening and personalized medicine. The central conceit there being that if we can use patient-specific or patient-derived tissue models, then we can print hundreds of these really, really quickly, and then use those to screen a range of different treatment options down to kind of this patient-specific level. In terms of the challenges, it's a lot of work to go from the idea, to the actual clinical implementation. So I would say that there is a yawning chasm between having some kind of functional system or prototype that you have in your lab, and then actually applying that or implementing that in kind of the clinical space. So you can think of that being involving things like user-centered product design, design for manufacture, the manufacturing process itself, regulatory hurdles, figuring out distribution, and this is not even touching on kind of business administration and actually running a business in the first place. So in the case of our 3D bioprinting system, this is really cool stuff. We're lucky that there's an intermediate market in the sense that we can sell our system to researchers in the near term. But if then we want to apply this to personalized medicine, then we have to develop an entirely new clinical workflow and overcome a lot of institutional inertia in that process of bringing that into the hospital space. So that's not to say that, of course, any of this is impossible, and every step, of course, on that process is necessary. But the biggest challenge is bridging that multi-year funding gap between starting that commercialization process and actually establishing a sustainable business.
Hugely challenging, but very exciting to hear that you're on the way with several projects. And I think it's something that a lot of researchers don't fully appreciate how challenging it is. So yeah, we wish you great success with those projects. Tim, can I ask you about CSIRO support? CSIRO supports lots of early stage companies and projects trying to make this transition, moving from research into manufacturing. What barriers do these projects typically face? And can you talk about how CSIRO can support these projects?
Sure, thank you. So you're right, CSIRO does offer a lot of support for companies to try and translate research into manufacturing. We've established a number of facilities specifically for this, like the Biomedical Materials Translational Facility, BMTF, which is a clean room and associated labs that operate under a quality management system, and they have certification for 9001, where we can design and develop devices for preclinical studies. And that has a whole range of equipment that is sort of scaled down versions of what's used in the industry, so that we have confidence that the processes and materials that we develop can be translated to industry and scalable. We also have a similar facility for biologics, where we're manufacturing recombinant proteins for vaccines and drugs. And that's our National Vaccine and Therapeutics Lab, NVTL. And so that's making protein-based therapeutics for clinical studies. It's aiming to get GMP certification. But in terms of barriers, I guess cost is a big barrier. These type of facilities are quite expensive to maintain and operate and set up. And as a not-for-profit organisation, CSIRO needs to recover some of our costs. But we do, so we do charge fees to recover some of our costs, but we do offer some reduction to those fees to eligible SMEs and academic researchers through CSIRO's Kickstart program and Therapeutic Innovation Australia funding, which can help offset the costs to do research at CSIRO.
Well, that's great for people to know, and I think your facility is something that can really help projects make those next steps out of university or other research environments. So I wonder, can I ask maybe Tim to start off with, do you think there are important things that researchers should be considering early on in the development pathways that tend to be missed? You know, when people are doing laboratory research, are they missing things that would help with that translation pathway?
I guess three things come to mind: design for manufacturing, regulatory considerations, and thirdly, ensuring that the device has been designed with not just patients in mind, but also all the users of the product. So if it's an implantable device, have they thought about the surgeon? If it's a reusable device, have you thought about how it might be cleaned and sterilized? But getting back to, I guess, design for manufacturing, a lot of what we do in a research lab, research environment is not necessarily amenable to large-scale production in an industrial setting. And, the chemicals and processes that are used sometimes need to be adjusted to make it more amenable. So for an example, in the research lab, we'd often use a lot of chemicals that might be hazardous or difficult to dispose of. And so we need to potentially change those out for more safer ones or easier to use in an industrial setting. Likewise for processes, we might purify a polymer using dialysis in the lab, but that's not a great process to use industrially, and perhaps a precipitation process might be a better choice. So there are considerations in the choice of chemicals and processes to ensure it's more easily manufactured at scale.
Yeah, that's great advice. So we should be thinking about that early on and hopefully developing our processes with things that can be translated. Yeah. Andrew, what do you think about things that researchers should be considering in the early stages?
Yeah, further to Tim's point there, I mean, from our side, really understanding and picturing the final device in its application, and that's really understanding the use case and the product presentation of how it's going to be presented to the hospital or used by the surgeon or used by the clinician. So really thinking about that, and then that factors into all of your product development aspects. So, I mean, innovation, we come up with so many innovative ideas and they mostly fail, and it's not because of lack of creativity. It's really because we haven't actually met the user requirements. So starting at the start with a user needs analysis is really critical. Understanding that regulatory process that Tim's touched on, and the FDA and the ISO standard all refer to really design control in the early days, and understanding user needs, performing a risk analysis, and then identifying all of those design inputs before you start designing a product.
So if you have a great idea, how do you go about doing a user needs analysis? Do you just talk to your friends, or what do you do?
Well, VMH run user needs analysis courses, Andrea. So
yeah, that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, there are references online. You can, but effectively, the first thing we would always do is really understand the use case. What is the use case of this product? How is it going to fit into the current workflow? Maybe if it's a product in the operating theatre, really getting to know that, and then sitting down and kind of capturing, a high level 10 to 12 to 15 user needs. And those user needs are then based on all of this process is based on, if anyone wants to Google search the FDA regulatory waterfall, that's what you should follow. So have a look at the user needs analysis. Those user needs should be, think of someone telling you, I want a device that cuts through skin, right? And then you go ahead and design a scalpel, the length of it, the weight of it, how sharp it is, and all that sort of thing. So if it's starting with that basic user needs of what does it need to do, and then your clinical trial actually assesses that, all of those components.
Yeah, that's great. And you referred to the VMH, that's the Victorian MedTech Skills and Devices Hub. We have a website and we do run short courses and other training that might be helpful for people on things like how do you write a good user needs statement. So thanks for the plug there. David, can I come to you and ask you from the researcher viewpoint, what do you think would help researchers move their products through technology readiness levels towards manufacturing? This pathway you're going on, and obviously cost is one factor, but what do you think researchers should know in that pathway?
So I'm gonna I guess second what a lot of Andrew's been saying there is that user needs is really important, but also user testing kind of as early as possible. So you don't need to have a product, you don't need to have a prototype ready. If you can just user test the idea, like what if we did this? What if we are able to modify your process this way? What if we are able to help you with this kind of idea? And just getting that feedback really early on in the process before you really do anything else is going to be really instructive for guiding kind of what direction your product or your innovation is actually going to take. I guess the second thing would be around kind of continuously thinking about then that business model, and obviously relates to then kind of the user testing. So thinking about who's going to buy this thing, how are they going to use it, is it going to be a viable commercial enterprise? I think is really important as well, because something can be fantastic. It can be a great product and could be an improvement on what people are already using. But if it's not cost effective and it doesn't work into the I guess the commercial kind of or the purchasing pathway, for example, that hospitals might use, it almost doesn't matter how good your product is if it's not going to be something that people aren't going to buy. And I think just in terms of, again, planning out that whole process, planning what your funding is actually going to look like, again, because there's a big gap between having an idea or having a prototype or research on a topic and actually implementing that in the clinical practice. That can take years, and there's different types of things that you're going to want to use your funding for, whether that's the actual R&D or if it's kind of improving kind of the business administration, or if it's trying to fund kind of any regulatory processes that you're doing throughout that process. So making sure that you have a continuous, unbroken chain of work you're able to accomplish, that you're able to achieve through funding, is really, really important.
Yeah, great advice, and challenging to do, but definitely important. Tim, how can researchers access facilities and expertise that might help them with this process? You touched on a couple of the facilities at CSIRO, but can you give some advice about how people can get some support?
Sure. So, quite open to people reaching out to us. Perhaps if you don't know the right researcher at CSIRO, CSIRO has an inquiries telephone number and an inquiries email address that you can reach out, and they can then put you in contact with the right people to potentially help you. But it's not just CSIRO. There's industry associations like Odds Biotech and MTAA. There's professional associations like ASBTE, and networks like Melbourne and Willem, medical device partnering programs. So there's a lot of help out there. You just have to reach out and make some contacts and ask for help, I guess. And in my experience, most people are very happy to assist where they can.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and so people can bring partly developed projects to CSIRO and work with you, for example, through the BMTF, get some support.
Yes, always happy to have a conversation and determine if we can help, or if we can't, who else in the ecosystem might be able to assist.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. And I guess a growing part of the ecosystem that's relatively new is the ACMD. So, Andrew, can you tell us about how the ACMD is going to support research translation?
I can, Andrea, and thanks for that. And this is a plug for ACMD. I'm currently wearing many hats, but I'm currently wearing the hat of the acting or interim CEO. So ACMD is the Centre of Aikenhead Medical Discovery, and it's a brand new 11-floor building due for completion in March 2025. And it's a collaboration between the 8 partners that have funded the entity, and that's ACU, Bionics Institute, Centre of Eye Research Australia, CSIRO, RMIT University, St Vincent's Hospital Melbourne, St Vincent's Institute of Medical Research, Swinburne University, and Melbourne University. So effectively, there'll be a whole lot of projects happening in this building, and they'll be all leveraging and using the state-of-the-art biomedical engineering equipment and the laboratories and facilities. Not every project has to include all of those 8 partners. It can include 1 or 2. So if you've got an idea, you can bring it to ACMD, and then all of a sudden, as a sort of hub and spoke model, we can access and leverage. Further to Tim's comment, we can kind of connect you with the appropriate researching team. The idea, the premise behind it is to really accelerate the translation and implementation of and commercialization of research, innovation, and medical technology. The focus of the building is really on MedTech, with a little bit of biotech, mainly on delivery systems of biotech and digital health. And it's co-located in at St Vincent's Hospital. So we've got a further to David's point, we've got a test ground, a sandpit of a hospital right in our backyard. So
Fantastic.
on site, there's going to be clinical simulation laboratories. There's human kinetics labs with gait analysis. There's Faraday rooms for testing of electrical sound and without interference. There's PC1, PC2 wet and dry laboratories, exhibition space. There's a 160-seat lecture theatre as well, which will be great. And there's research lounge, and also ACMD will be running programs there as well to bring out some collaboration between these program partners.
Fantastic. It's hugely exciting. And yeah, on the corner of Victoria and Nicholson Streets, you can see the building going up, so it's not too far away. Andrew, another question for you, if I may, is about sovereign manufacturing. You know, we hear a lot from the government that they'd really like to grow the medtech manufacturing sector here in Victoria and Australia. Can you comment on how important you think that is and how feasible it might be?
I think it's super important that we try in our first effort to try and maintain manufacturing here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. A lot of times we can't, and that's commercial reality. However, we have so many resources available to us from a manufacturing perspective. We've just got to reach out and connect. And that's one of the things, a plug for VMH again, but connect with Victorian VMH, Victorian MedTech Hub, and you can reach through to some of these manufacturers. Either reach out to CSIRO or ACMD or University of Melbourne, because you can find them. And really, we've got to work effectively smart about this and try and create an ecosystem where we can support our manufacturing community in the medtech sector.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, that really leads us into our next question. One of our attendees has asked a question about the single biggest constraints encountered in translating research to commercial products, but also we have a question from someone who's a CEO of an engineering consultancy specialising in medtech device development. And they've commented that they're closely involved with many universities, but unfortunately see great research projects fail to reach commercialisation. So maybe Andrew and then David, could you comment on what you think the reasons might be? What are those constraints and things that are blocking projects translating?
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit before, that there's no shortage of great ideas. Everyone knows that. And as I said, they rarely fail from creativity. But for me, some time back, it was always about trying to find good projects and then try and find good people and then try and find funding. So I still think some of those barriers are there and they do prevent projects reaching commercialization. And that's where collaboration is really important. If we can bring together larger groups, larger stakeholders, rather than trying to do it all on your own, really accessing the resources that are available now around in our ecosystem here we've got, it gives you a greater chance to actually get larger MRFF grants, to de-risk it, to then get private investment. I don't know whether you've got something, Dave.
Yeah, I guess I can speak as on behalf of researchers and people in kind of the university space in particular. Researchers already have a full-time job. You know, they're doing teaching, they're obviously doing research, they're doing administration, they're managing research groups. They're doing kind of a lot already, but there's never going to be a better advocate for that project than the research or the research team that's kind of come up with that in the first place. But then it's rare to find a confluence of circumstances where you have someone or a team that has both the wherewithal and the time, in addition to everything that they're doing, to actually start kind of an enterprise. So, just kind of speaking practically, it's very difficult for a researcher to go kind of all in on an enterprise. Considering they already have they already have a position, they're already doing kind of a job they like. Academic researchers tend to be in research because they like doing research, and the skill set for forming and running a business can be a bit of a different world, to put it mildly, or a bit of a slog, if I'm speaking bluntly, for people who may not particularly be excited about the process of running a business, which is a different skill set. A model that I've found works to some extent is if you can have really interested and engaged PhD students who are interested in that kind of commercialization pathway, and who actually do have a bit more time to do things like attend startup programs and that kind of thing as well. And it has to be said, again, it's starting a business is a risk, and if you are a PhD student or someone starting out the career, you don't necessarily have to think about things as much like mortgages and childcare, and you have the ability to kind of take bigger risks as well, right?
Yeah, I think that collaboration is key, because it's just impossible for the academic to do their full-time job and everything else, but also to have the skills required. And we've seen in the university some examples where people have managed to bring a team around and maybe go a little part-time on their academic work for a period to enable that. So there are some models starting to appear that can facilitate that. Another aspect there is government and industry and partnerships. Tim, can you comment on the best approach to sort of improve engagement between government and industry and CSIRO as well?
Yes, I guess, encouraging funding mechanisms that can encourage these partnerships, I guess. So there are a few of these type of grants out there currently that fund relationships between private industry and governments. Things like the Australian Innovation Economic Accelerator Program, the CRCP program as well, and MTP Connect. They also have a number of grants that fund translation of technologies. I guess another thing you could consider is trying to promote them through an award, so that things like in the Eureka Award, which promotes these type of relationships and partnerships, the successful ones, so that they encourage more to occur, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. And Andrew, maybe if I can bring you in there, you've had some experience of partnering with academics to get some of these kind of funding proposals up. How does that work from the industry viewpoint? Do you find that a good process? Does it work well?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the programs. I find the ones that the voucher programs, I find them particularly useful, because the financial reporting and burden on industry is really minimal. So if there's any government listening, introduce more voucher programs that issue vouchers to industry to then go and use with our manufacturing partners, because the burden, the simplicity of the program is fantastic. I really do enjoy that. Beyond that, all the advice would be to try and find collaborations, create a bigger collaborative agreement, but make sure your IP is really clear about who owns the background IP, who owns any improvements on that background IP, and then who owns the new IP. And they are all very different. So you want to be very clear about who owns all of those components before you kick off and get a $1 billion grant.
Yeah. It's easier to discuss with the application phase, isn't it?
Yeah, get it in writing and avoid the fighting.
Good. So the next question we have from our registrants is about interdisciplinary collaboration. Obviously, this is something that's really important. We've touched on collaboration, but I wonder, David, could you talk about how interdisciplinary collaborations help to support your projects and really help you on this translation pathway?
Well, if I'm defining kind of interdisciplinary as, across kind of institutions and across disciplines, obviously, as well, what's been really useful has actually been engaging clinicians. who may have kind of their own kind of research ideas or product ideas as well. So it's super important to engage them basically from the very start. Whether again they're coming up with kind of a problem that you're trying to solve or vice versa, and make them. It's not just someone who's coming up with an idea and then you're working on it. You're part of a team that you're actually kind of working on that together. So after all, if you're designing a system that's going to be used in the clinical space, it's super important that at every stage of the process that you have that clinical input throughout that whole process, and they can talk to their clinician buddies and get feedback kind of along that whole process as well, and they can get plugged into an ecosystem that you as a researcher may just not have any kind of direct experience with. So again, they need to be part of the team. It's not a arm's length kind of thing. And I would extend that to, I guess, any skill set or background that's going to be critical to your innovation. They need to be part of the team. It can't be someone that you're just, again, holding at arm's length or just getting information from. They need input throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think sometimes researchers are worried about sharing their ideas because they might lose control. But would your advice be that you need to build that team, even though there might be some risk?
Absolutely, and it's there is absolutely risk associated with teams, with large groups of people, especially if you're coming from different environments and you may not know each other all that well, I guess, from the very outset. And I'm not saying that conflict is unavoidable or anything, but it's absolutely a risk worth taking, because ideas on their own don't go anywhere. They need people to realize them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Another question we have, Andrew, is about blockers to mass adoption, particularly of AI-enabled medtech. This is obviously something we hear about enormously. It's growing a huge amount of interest. Can you comment on what the blockers and challenges are there?
Sure, and it's super exciting seeing all of the work that's being done with AI and machine learning work in that space. So the immediate challenges really are that it's changing the face of medical device registration as we know it. So somewhat the verification testing is then different. So a lot of test models and the traditional method of taking a product through bench testing and then animal models is not always relevant for that type of technology. So, and then you've got a validation. You need longer term, longitudinal studies, which are really quite time consuming sometimes to actually show the AI can make a difference. And so those clinical trials that set up can be significant and very time consuming and costly. So the regulators also need to catch up, I suppose. They've sort of been caught on their heels a little, and however they are catching up, and we've now seen AI software as a service medical devices registered by the FDA, and the TGA has discussion papers on it. So if anyone's developing papers, there are some good guidance. Sorry, if anyone is developing AI-enabled medtech, there are some good guidance documents out there, both US and Australian. But as far as one of the blockers there from the regulators, everyone knows that when you manufacture a device, you have a design freeze. You can no longer make changes to that design of that device. However, we all know that software is constantly changing, and we're releasing, new releases to overcome bugs and things like that. So that's been a challenge, and there are now strategies in place to be able to deal with those challenges.
Yeah, it's so interesting and really fast moving, isn't it?
Yeah. And
our next question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say St Vincent's Hospital has got a project under Professor Helen Fraser, they're looking at using AI to improve the early detection of breast cancer in a screening program. So yeah, there's groups who are working on it. There's other AI being used in lung and other radiology applications. So there's quite a bit going on.
Yeah, fascinating and huge potential. The next question is also related to an area that I know you have some experience with, Andrew, which is about barriers and benefits to commercialisation for personalised medicine compared to more generic solutions. Could you comment on what you see as the challenges there?
Yeah, and again, the challenge is really just that personalised medicine is for those, it's effectively trying to make a different product for each different person. And how do you go and register a different product for an individual for N=1, an individual? So effectively, as a manufacturer, you would then try and create what they call a design envelope or a range. So you would, have a we'll make a device that is between, this size and this size, and we'll take the worst case scenario and we'll do all of our verification and validation testing on that worst case scenario. So that's generally what's happening in that space of commercializing personalized medical devices.
Right, yeah, it's interesting to see how it can develop. Dave, do you have experience with the personalized devices as well?
Well, it's something we're getting into in the context of the 3D bioprinting system that we've developed. Again, world's fastest 3D bioprinter. We're able to print directly into individual wells in a well plate, this kind of thing. We would love to be able to apply this for being able to actually use a patient's own cells, kind of grow them up, and essentially create a tissue that then we can implant back into the patient. But you can imagine in any of those is that there is a long tail of regulatory kind of work that's going to be involved in that, especially considering where not just personalized medicine, but biologics. So biologics in the context of personalized medicine, it's an evolving and fairly kind of recent, I guess, innovation in the regulatory space as well. So there's a bit of uncertainty about kind of what exactly is required and what the pathways are, depending on your particular kind of use case. So I would say that's a barrier, but obviously there's fantastic benefits towards being able to do personalized medicine. In the case of some breast cancers, for instance, if you could test what treatments are going to work for the patient before you actually apply them, that could be massive. There are some breast cancer treatments that if you have a particular type of cancer, you give the person this treatment, it will actually make the cancer worse rather than actually improving it. So if you could determine that well in advance, using kind of an autologous kind of tissue sample model that you're screening, then that would be a fantastic innovation in the healthcare space. But yeah, a bit of regulatory work to work through before anything in that space can be realized.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a huge amount of really exciting research in organoids and personalised medicine, drug screening going on here at the University of Melbourne and beyond. And I know that the TGA are interested. So I think in developing complex products like that, engaging with the regulators is also advice that I hear regularly. I know Oz Biotech and their Cell and Gene Catalyst are looking at a range of the sort of biologics questions there. So engaging with those organisations, engaging with the regulators is key as well. Maybe I can move on then to a question for Tim. You mentioned that CSIRO has ISO 9001. How do you translate that or relate that to ISO 13485 for medical devices? Can you comment on that relationship, Tim?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So 13485 is the regulations around quality management systems for medical devices. That is actually something that we're looking at implementing in our facility. So to do that, we'd need to do some gap analysis. We have our current quality management system is quite robust. Originally, it was set up with good laboratory practice, also meeting the standards for GLP as well. So we're potentially looking into changing across to 13485 as well in the future.
Right. Yeah, I know, Andrew, you've had some experience in setting up 13485.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've got a company that has ISO 13485, there's no actual restriction that mandates that you need to have or work with only ISO 13485 companies, right? So if I was a medical device company and I'd engage Tim to do some work, Tim did some work in his clean room under ISO 9001, that's his standard. So we would then just basically conduct a risk analysis on what are the components that we're worried about and really identify those risks, and then start putting in a practice, some maybe there might be another cleaning step that we put in there, or maybe there's a step, another quality check that we just put in there to mitigate the risk of something happening. So, for that person, if they're looking to use someone, say CSIRO, who have 9001, that's great. And they should just analyze that process of manufacturing and then try and mitigate the risk of other things happening.
And how does ISO 13485 relate to GMP, the GMP quality standards that we hear about as well?
Yeah, so historically GMP was a pharmaceutical manufacturing grade, and ISO 13485 came in as a medical device standard, as Tim said.
Right. Yeah, so there are certainly people in Victoria who have GMP cell manufacturing, for example, such as cell therapies at Peter Mac. And as we get into these complex products that have biologics and devices, it's quite a bit to navigate.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember there for device companies or industry, if you're looking to develop a product, you can technically manufacture this. Well, I shouldn't say in your backyard, but you can manufacture it with someone, with the company of your choice. But you, as the legal manufacturer, are going to get quizzed by the regulator on what your processes are. Now, if you then say, I sourced a product from a company that didn't have any standards or certifications, then they may conduct a more detailed audit and fail or something like that. Whereas if you say, I secure services or manufacturing from Tim at CSIRO and they have ISO 9001, that gives you some peace of mind knowing that there's a quality standard in place and being manufactured too. Or if it's a GMP standard, that is a quality standard that you can effectively rely on, but you should always audit your suppliers as well.
Yeah, very important. Good. David, a question for you. You mentioned the translation to establishing a company. Is that something that you've done? And at what sort of point in the pathway do you think a researcher should look at spinning out a company?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one that we've been pondering for a while. So, I've spun out one company, again related to a reusable face mask that we've developed in concert with some clinicians from Western Health, and it's been a bit of a journey. And right now we're trying to continue that commercialization pathway and move into manufacture and that kind of thing, and looking at similar pathways kind of for the other things that we're doing at the moment. But I would say this is pretty important if you're in a university ecosystem or in a place that's connected to a university or university research, is that you should leave that to as late as possible. You should stay within kind of a university kind of funding ecosystem, and use that funding as long as you can. Not to say that there's not funding kind of outside of that world as well, but then you lose a lot of the advantages that you have at university: access to facilities, funding rates or academic rates associated with some facilities. For example, the Melbourne Centre for Nanofabrication, your prices are about a third, I think, versus kind of industry rates. And the funding sources that are available specifically to university researchers for this kind of development work. I'm thinking the Intramural Development Grant. There's a lot of grants from the MRFF, kind of in this vein as well, and the ARC linkage grants. Those are available if you are a university researcher or a university team. So it's best for you to take advantage of those funding sources while you can, especially compared to investor or venture capital kind of based investment. The government funding sources will tend to be non-dilutive, whereas if you move outside of that ecosystem, then suddenly you're not able to kind of realize the same kind of value for your enterprise.
That's great advice. Yeah, so the timing is really key.
And I just to kind of follow on as well, you will be a much more attractive proposition to any venture capital kind of business or any investor the farther you are along your product development pathway. So it's very hard to sell an idea or even a prototype to an investor. But if you have essentially what is a finished product with a business model kind of in mind, and you have a very convincing business case for that product, then that's a much easier sell for a venture capital firm, and you're going to get a higher valuation as well.
Yeah, sounds good. So a question I might throw to you, Andrew, now on early user testing and how that works with regulatory constraints. So can you conduct your early clinical or case studies before you have a definitive design?
Yes, this probably relates back to pretty much, I think, all of the concept of what we've all been talking about. So it's a great question. Really about the FDA waterfall. So once you've got your user needs, you then develop your design inputs, you design your product, and then you define your design outputs. Your design outputs are basically the specification of your product. So at that point in time, you should then conduct all of your lab, your bench testing. And that's assessing, did I actually make the right product? Do my design outputs meet my design inputs? And that's a step that's critical. And you can then go back, make further changes, do your bench testing, and continually do your verification testing as you go. And effectively, you're testing your outputs against your inputs. You can continue to make changes all the way along that process. So that's encouraged, supported. Regulators love seeing that. And just thinking back to the question, once you then go and design a medical device, you then are going to put it into a clinical trial and assess that device against the user needs now. So at that point in time, you would pretty much have a device freeze because you are putting it into a feasibility study. In drugs, we generally talk about phase 1, phase 2, 2A, 3, 3B, etc. In clinical trial phases. In devices, we generally talk about phase 1 is your feasibility study or a pilot study. So that's a 10-patient feasibility study. Does the device do what I want it to do, and i.e. meet all of my user needs? So if it doesn't, you then go back to make your design changes and then do another feasibility study to change. So you then move on to, say, a 60-patient pivotal study, etc. So I hope that answers that question.
I think that's great. There's a framework. And I think the other thing to note is that there are experts in the ecosystem who know how to do these things. And so if you are taking a project through, it's really good to consult with someone who has experience in the pathway. So you're not doing things that then need to be repeated because they weren't done appropriately. One more quick question for you, Andrew, is how can people get in touch with the ACMD and potentially collaborate?
That's an easy one. Go to the website, www.acmd.org.au, and I hope I said that right. And there's a contact us page. Fill out your details there, and one of us will get in contact with you and connect you with one of these amazing researchers and collaborators.
Fantastic. It's very exciting. Well, we're almost coming to the end of the session, and I'd like to ask each of you one further question, which is, what has been your greatest challenge that you faced in developing or commercialising a medical product, and how did you overcome it? Maybe, Tim, could I start with you on your challenge and how you've overcome for one of your projects?
I guess one of the greatest challenges has been involved in a first-in-human clinical study and making materials for that study, which is quite scary thought, at least initially. But I guess being part of a multidisciplinary team that really helped, and having the clinical input along the way, and all the experts applying advice and double checking that things were correct.
Fantastic. Can you tell us what the product was?
It was a corneal implant, corneal inlay. So.
Fantastic. Dave, how about you?
I would say the greatest challenge that I've had, well, I think it's the greatest challenge that any working human being has, is time and lack thereof. And I'm not sure that I've completely overcome it, but certainly being part of a team and having people in the team who have more of it than you, or who can share kind of the time and the workload, is just so important. And I think I mentioned before as well, for example, if I have PhD students who are far more kind of interested and engaged in that commercialization process, then that's a really for me, as an academic anyway, then that's an easy way to help overcome that barrier.
That's fantastic and amazing experience for them if that's the pathway that they want to follow. Yeah, thanks. Andrew, do you have an example you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think my challenges have changed over time. When I was spinning out companies and 10 or 20 years ago, the hardest thing was trying to get researchers to commercialize, and academic scientists, convincing them that they don't manufacture devices and that a publication in science is effectively not going to save anyone's life. It needs to be adopted by a medical device company to be commercialized, sold, and hit the patient. So that was years ago. That was my biggest challenge, trying to convince that. But I reckon we're so far down the track now for all of your work and ACMD, what we're doing nowadays. My biggest challenge now is about growing the MedTech ecosystem to create more projects and for more investment to retain manufacturing here in the MedTech sector. That's my biggest challenge.
It's really exciting to see how it's developing, and will be great to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years, especially with ACMD opening up. Well, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. So on behalf of the MedTech platform and the University of Melbourne, I'd like to thank our panel for a really interesting discussion. Thank you, Andrew, Tim and David. And also thank you to Zara for our illustration today. It's a great way to capture the discussions and learnings, and we'll have a fun time looking at all the details there. So thank you. And I'd like to thank our audience for all your questions and your interest in this important issue. We'd appreciate your input on our post-event survey. If you can take the time, that'll be located at the bottom of the video stream in the Q&A chat box. We value your feedback, and that will help us to shape future MedTech webinars. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.